righty. I think we're good. I think we're live. All righty. Let me check sound, and I think we are good to go. One sec. All good. Live. Cool. 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 You guys can hear me well? Sweet. 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 Cool. Cool. Yep. All right. Cool deal. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? I know it's been super long since I've done a live stream on the public channel. I don't even remember the last time I've did one of these. I think it's been a month, and maybe even 2 months. It's been quite a while, but I knew it's been a minute. And now that my fight's over, I told you guys I had an MMA fight last weekend. Now that that's over, and I feel good, and I have some energy, I was like, okay, now we can go back to doing some live streams, maybe once a week on the public channel, where I give you guys a full rundown. Like, this is what I'm looking at for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, ADA, Luna, just the whole list. We're just gonna go through all of them. We're gonna break them down, and then afterwards, you guys can even go ahead and we're gonna actually take some chat recommendations of cryptos that you want me to look at the charts on. Now, we're not going to be doing charting on like micro caps. Okay, we're not going to be looking at like $10 million market caps. Let's focus a little bit more on some of the bigger ones today. But I do have a live stream designated pretty soon. Somewhat Gem Finder kind of somewhat. I know we stopped Gem Finders whenever the market crashed, but something similar coming soon. Okay, let's stay tuned. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. So if you see a few of you asking about how my fight went, I did go. I did win. I went out there. We got the job done. I actually did have this pulled up because I made the post on Twitter. But this is just a little a cool little clip from the fight. I'll play it real quick while people are still getting notified that the stream is live. But this is just a little bit of a clip here. It was a good fight. It was a really good fight. I went out there and I think I was just on a little bit of a different level, and we got the win. So it's pretty good. The hair braids are in. Once them braids come out, that's how you guys know it's going down. But one thing I will say is this dude is extremely tough because I hit him with the kitchen sink and he just managed to just take it and take it and take it. So, but yeah, so other than that, yeah, we went out there, we got the win. It was a super good one. I'm really excited and happy about it. And I am even more happy to be back now and, able to do these live streams and get going, picking up where we left off, right? So in today's stream, what I wanted to start off with and kind of start by talking about is what is going on in the market. I think it's going to be important that we kind of talk about what's going on in the market right now, and then we use that to transition over into our alts, what we can expect from them, and then I'm going to kind of give you guys my game plan of how I'm going about this, okay? Because I think what we're looking at right now is the start of what's either going to be the last capitulation, the last pullback before the move to the upside, or the move to the upside. I am genuinely under the belief that we are back in bullish territory and that the market's flipped bullish. It would be extremely hard to convince me otherwise at this point. Okay. And so for that reason, I am going to go ahead and start kind of telling you guys my strategy, telling you guys my opinions and things of that nature, and starting to do it on this public forum, of course. Now, I do all my live streams on my Patreon. I still do live streams on there 3, 4, 5 times a week, but I do want to come up on here like once a week at least, at minimum, and get a public live going. Okay. But I would say what we should probably start with is Bitcoin. We need to, of course, start with Bitcoin. As much as I love my alts, the rest of the market follows Bitcoin, and that's just what it does. Okay. So if Bitcoin crashes, so are all the rest. You can see it now, right? Even if Bitcoin crashes a little bit and the rest crash a little bit, they're still following it, right? So looking at Bitcoin from a macro-based perspective, of course, we have been really, really, really paying attention to this ascending wedge. Now, our ascending channel, it's not even necessarily wedge like, it's more channely. But a lot of people, and for some reason, I've not seen enough YouTubers talking about the very clear wedge here. I mean, this is about as clear as it gets, right? And I was telling you guys that realistically, we shouldn't get too excited until we break it. As we started to reach the top of this on March 30th, that was around the last time I made a post that was kind of centered towards the market itself. And I said, hey, until we get back above this key level of resistance, we're not really in the clear, right? Because we could still roll. And so in the Patreon, we started to kind of take some profits off a few things that were really extended because we were aware of the fact that this was still a pretty high risk, right? Now, looking at it now, what we know is that in a similar fashion, now that we are at the bottom side here, at any given point, we could flip extremely bullish and come revisit the top. And it's going to be a game at this point of figuring out, are we going to break to the upside first or the downside first? Now, if for the next year and a half, 2 years, we want to just keep doing this, sure, that'd be great. But is that going to happen? No, that's not going to happen, right? It's just not realistic. What we need to expect is that a breakout in either direction is coming soon. But considering the fact that we are expecting that breakout to happen realistically by June, that's kind of my hot time horizon. I'm like 2 months max, two more swings maximum before we see a move. I will go ahead and say that I am still under the belief, 100% wholeheartedly. No one can really convince me at this point that we are going to see the move towards the upside relatively soon. Okay. Now, what I mean by that is if in worst case scenario, support fails down here, and we're going to zoom in and get a little bit more short term focus in a second here. What's up, Lockbox Music? Long time to see. If we do lose this support down towards this level, I am under the belief that we will see one more capitulation that will then be followed by the growth. I think it's either going to happen like that, which I'm okay with because I will start to accumulate like crazy once that support is established. Or I see we bounce, we break the top side, and we continue towards the top. Very similar fashion to what we have seen historically. I mean, there have been times where we have seen those clearings of these ascending wedges, and then we break out towards the top side, right? I mean, if we look back at something like this, for a great example, let's even look at this one, right? So we saw the price starting to fall here, boom, bam, bam, we kind of ranged, we bounced, we bounced, we bounced, we broke out, we back tested, we continued towards the top side. So it's not even here, right? It's not 100% chance that just because we're in ascending wedge or an ascending channel, which do have a kind of a bad rep of being bearish channels, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to break to the downside. No, Bitcoin has historically been capable of doing it. It is just important at this point that we do it, right? It doesn't really matter what it's done historically. We need to see it happen now. So, looking at this from a technical perspective, okay, that's what we're going to focus on today. A technical perspective, we can start to kind of plan out what we think is going to happen. Okay, now, in my opinion, it all revolves around realistically, like right now. To be honest, I would say that the importance is happening now. Now, the reason why I say that is because, as you guys can see, coming off of the top side here, one thing we saw was this beautiful downtrend established. Although some people don't like downtrends, I kind of do sometimes because I like just seeing technically strong lines. But as we can see that we had our third touch today. One, two, and we did come up, we touched it, and we ran into resistance, which confirmed this is a trend. And now we have a confirmed downtrend or a downward sloping level of resistance that we are now respecting. But what's interesting is the fact that as we did hit this bottom side support of this macro channel, if I talk about bottom side support, I'm talking about the macro channel again. What we can see is that we actually use that support establishment to bounce on this beautiful 4 hour candle above this level of resistance. So, considering the fact that we were capable of using this key level of support to break above this macro, or kind of like a short term slash midterm macro level of resistance, as we can see here, it tells me that there is a strong chance that we do use this support level to revisit the top side here, because this level has pushed us down consistently for weeks, 2 weeks at that. But as soon as we hit this key level of macro support, provided us with enough strength to get back above this. That says that at this point, at this moment, this was stronger than this. And that is a sign that our bulls are willing to step in and kind of outpace the bears whenever it gets important. So it tells me that we do still have the potential to see this price climbing back up towards the top side of this channel to retest, which looks like $49,000 to $50,000. It just comes down to, at this point, now that we are seeing this short-term micro back test, do we hold it or do we not? It's about as simple as that. So in yesterday's Patreon live stream, I told the guys, I said, look, I know we are doing great and we're pushing back right now and we're looking to get back above the trend line. But let's give this one a second, okay? Let's give this one a second before we get too excited. The reason being, you turn on something like your Bollinger Bands, on the hourlies, for example. What you could see is that we did get extremely overextended very fast, right? In which we just immediately shot up and we hit the top side of these Bollinger Bands, especially seeing that our RSI got very extended right up towards the 70 level with that one little bitty move. And that kind of told me, I was like, that looks a little bit overextended. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see this thing pulling back to come back to retest this downward sloping level of resistance, look to flip it as support. Now, I said not only that though, it actually wouldn't surprise me to see it pull all the way to 40,250 bucks towards this previous level here. And the reason being is that if we do zoom in on the hourly charts, you can see we put in some type of improvised inverse head and shoulders here, in which we did have this key level of relevance, right? In which we came back up to it, we failed to hold it, which led to a pullback. We came back up to it, we failed to hold it, we came back up to it, we failed. But as soon as we cleared it, we took off, okay? And so this is a level of relevance, and it doesn't have to come back down to it, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did, okay? Even if we trailed off a little bit, came back towards this, back tested this key level, and then continued, I definitely would not be surprised at all. So considering the fact that we saw overextensions as we did break out of these two key levels of resistance, I kind of figured we would see a little bit of a pullback here. So do understand that though it does look a little ugly today, and we're down a couple percent on each one of our cryptos, it's not really the end of the world. It's not something that I'm too concerned about. It just comes down to the idea that we need to set the higher low at this point above this line of support. Okay. So looking at the 4-hour charts, now that we know that this is pretty, it's not the end of the world. It's not anything to be super stressed out about right now. What I would go, Will Smith, I'm gonna start saying that. Now that we do know that this is important and that this is okay, let's talk about what we need to see. Okay. Well, personally speaking, I am totally okay with us seeing this thing kind of trail back off and pulling back, especially considering the fact that we are now out from under this trend line here. But I do want to see on the 4-hour charts that we're capable of holding and closing above it. If at this point we do fall back below this trend line and we start to retest sub 40,000, I think that there's a fair chance we're going to lose this key level of support. So, what I would go ahead and say right now is that today we need to be paying the closest amount of attention to not necessarily wanting when is the best time to buy or when's the best time to sell, but what is actually just genuinely happening with the price. And I would say that right now, I am just going to sit back and watch and see if we're capable of holding this trend line and establishing the higher low either here or even over here. That's fine. I don't care. I just want to see that we're able to stay above this trend line, especially as we're coming to back test it right now. Okay. Now, if we're able to do so, let's talk about the bullish scenario, then let's talk about the bear scenario. Let's break this up into twos. Okay. Well, if we're capable of holding and if we're capable of doing a good job and we come back down, even if maybe we do roll towards here, towards, tomorrow, and we hold here and we start to set off towards the top side, I'm actually not going to get too excited until we're capable of clearing $43,300. The reason being is that Bitcoin has taught us lessons throughout this run that can be applicable and have been historically applicable to save us a lot of money, right? Now, one of the things that we've noticed is that Bitcoin does this a lot. It'll be in a downtrend, it'll set these highs. Let's do it. Let's make that a little bit clearer. There we go. Okay, that's fine. It'll set these highs and we'll have this very clear level of resistance. This is the trend line, right? And what we've noticed is that although Bitcoin breaks the trend line, a lot of people will say right there is the time to purchase. But what I've noticed is that Bitcoin has a tendency to break the trend line, come up to where its most recent macro level of resistance, wherever the last time it touched that trend line was, and then bounce back to the downside. Okay. It has a pretty strong tendency to do so. Okay. Even if we look at this huge macro move, let's look at this on the daily charts just for a quick second. What can we see here? Well, what we can see is that as soon as it broke the trend, boom, right? We got a pretty solid trend break here. It broke out, came all the way back up to the same area of confluence that we saw in which it put in the highs over here, and it bounced right back to the downside, even lower than it was when it broke out. So I've not been buying Bitcoin on breakouts recently. I've been buying it on the clearing of the most recent level of resistance. Because I, in my opinion, say, well, that means more often than not that we're going to make progress and that we're not going to see another pullback in which I could be purchasing lower than if I buy on the breakout of the trend line, if that makes any sense. So going back into this thing on the 4-hour charts, what I'm going to say is that I'm actually not going to get too excited, and I'm not going to get back to purchasing or doing anything of that nature until we're capable of seeing Bitcoin clear this $43,300 area and break that previous high right here. Okay. If it's capable of doing so, yeah, likelihood is we'll see a bit of a pullback, a short-term pullback, but more often than not, this opens the door up for the higher low to be established. And then we can start that 3-step accumulation that I've talked about on the channel, in which I purchase on the breakout, I purchase on the back testing of support, and then I purchase whenever we re-clear that breakout high again. So it's a 3-step accumulation on these breakouts here. Okay. So overall, my whole game plan right now is just to kind of watch and see because look, right now it does seem as if we are going back sub this trend line, right? We're going back under the trend line. But until we get closes, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of just it doesn't really matter, right? Until we start getting closes here, I'm not really all too concerned. I just want to see that we're capable of closing above the trend line or at least bouncing off of this and continuing towards the top side. So in the best case scenario, again, if we get back above 43.3 thousand, I will be doing a little bit of accumulating up at this level, but do understand that there is a strong chance we will see a short-term pullback into continuation to allow those indicators to reset. And so I would be doing some type of purchase of this nature, right? Breakout, back test, double breakout, and then we go on towards the top side. Okay. Now, let's look at the indicators because we need to kind of see, is that realistic? Like, is the bullish scenario right now realistic? Is it more likely than not that we will set the higher low here, that we will, or maybe W bottom, right? Do we W bottom here and then continue? Is it realistic that that happens? Well, looking at the RSI first and foremost, I would say that I think so. Okay. I would say that I think so, especially if we look at the hourlies. Now, the reason I say this is because if we look at the hourly RSI, one thing that's happening at this point is a strong drive of bullish divergence. In which, if we look at the most recent macro low we set on April 13th, so earlier yesterday, compared to where we are now, as long as we put in a bounce above 39,680 bucks, we are seeing the higher low and the lower low. And one thing we know is that on these drives to the upside, Bitcoin has a very high tendency to respect bullish divergence, and it has a very high tendency to act off of bullish divergence with growth. That is what it has been doing throughout this whole run. Let's look at examples. We look back to the growth in which we were seeing throughout this big move to the upside. Let's talk about it. Looky here. Okay, let's talk about this first move. Let's go. Sure, let's go here. We had a case of exaggerated bullish divergence in which we put in this low. It's very weird that we're at the same exact level, but anyway. So as you can see, we put in an equivalent low. Whenever we put in this equivalent low, we very clearly put in a higher low here. This was a drive of exaggerated bullish divergence. From there, what we can see happen is that we put in a low into a higher low. And then from that low to the higher low, we put in a low to a lower low on the RSI on this full reset towards the 30 level, which is a case of bullish divergence. Now, going forward, we can see that there have been many, many instances in which we saw a very similar thing happen, in which we saw even back here. Looky here, in which we put in a low and a higher low and a low and an equivalent low, another drive of exaggerated bullish divergence. And so what that tells us is that on the hourly time frames, as we do make these climbs and we see these short-term resets and pullbacks, when we are seeing these drives of bullish divergence or exaggerated bullish divergence, more often than not, Bitcoin does respect them, right? Because whenever we start to see the falls, we don't really start to see those divergences happening, right? You look at your lows, you got a low, you got a lower low, you got a low, you got a lower low. There is no bullish divergence here that kind of can sway it in the other direction. But once we start to see these drives of bullish divergence, it is a good sign that we may be on the right track. Okay. And so looking at it on a shorter time frame, seeing that we are seeing some bullish divergence forming, it says that it seems to me that the bears on the hourlies at minimum will get exhausted, whether it be here or at this double bottom right here. And it is extremely likely that as we edge towards this 30 or even sub 30 on the RSI, we could get a strong bounce, which I think would allow us to set that higher low. Realistic, I think we would set the higher low above where we were back here at 39.3K actually. And then from that point forward, we would see some growth. It seems as if the hourlies are setting themselves up for a bounce of that nature. Now, whenever you put that kind of into juxtaposition with the Bollinger Bands, you can see here that we are extended into the bottom side of the Bollinger Bands quite significantly, right? We saw them squeeze together. And then usually what happens is that as we extend outside of them on that hourlies, we will resort back to that 20 simple moving average, which in this case has us back up towards $41,000. As you can see, usually whenever we start to get extended to the bottom side, it's only a matter of time before we see another push to the top side. So the fact that we are seeing bullish divergence on many of the time frames mixed in with overextensions towards the downside on your Bollinger Bands, it kind of tells me that we are definitely in a position to see a bounce happen. It just needs to happen at this point. Now, as you can see, look where we just wigged down to. We're coming right back down to this key zone of confluence right here. So do be on the lookout for maybe even a bounce from this level. But realistically, as long as we do not set, this is important, a low below $39,300, we are okay to see growth, towards the upside. We saw a huge ass move to the upside here. That needs to be followed by, more often than not, a huge ass move to the downside. But as long as we are capable of setting the higher low, now that we've set the higher high off of this key level of macro support, I think we're in a position to see growth back to the upside. And that's my bullish thesis on why I definitely think that we could still be in a position to see a strong bullish move at this point. But now, let's talk about the bad shit. Okay. Let's talk about what if I'm wrong. What if my gut says that we could very possibly see this bounce and that we are in a position to do it. But let's talk about what if I'm wrong. Okay. What if I'm wrong? Because my whole what's the word? My whole thesis for my YouTube channel is not to tell you guys what I think. Okay. It's just to tell you what I see. And I'm going to tell you the good stuff and the bad stuff. And I'm going to tell you, how do we recognize what's good and how do we recognize it when it's bad? Because if I tell you it's going up, this is why it's going up, and then it goes down, you might be sat there thinking, well, what do I do now? Right. And I don't want to put you in that position. Some people always comment, they're like, so you're saying it can go up or it can go down? Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Because I don't know. No one knows. But I like to prepare you guys for any outcome. Okay. And so let's talk about what if, like what if we do see the price of Bitcoin falling and we come back down, and this drive right here is wrong. It does not happen. It is not successful. And we come back down below $39,300. We lose this low and we break out to the bottom side of this ascending wedge. Well, let me kind of let me get a little real with you guys, okay? In the event in which we do so, it is going to probably get a little ugly for a little while. Okay. And that's something that I would be willing to expect. But usually, what we see in moments like these, whenever we see the retail investor getting shaken out, then they come back, then they get shaken out, then they come back, then they get shaken out. And we see these moments where shorts are getting liquidated, longs are getting liquidated, shorts are getting liquidated, longs are getting liquidated over and over and over again. Historically, for Bitcoin, that has started to be the moment where we start to see the whales doing their final accumulation. And what I mean by that is, usually what happens is that everyone starts to get confident that the market is falling, because this market is controlled by whales and we all know this. But as the market starts to fall, all of those longs who are just so excited about this move right here, they start to get crushed. The whales start to sell and we start to see it getting a little bit ugly. Okay. Now, look, from that point forward, as the price starts to fall, we will see these strong bounces, right? In which we just see these huge moves to the upside and these huge moves to the downside. And that's okay. But realistically, this is when a lot of people are making a lot of money, either shorting the market. For the most part, that's the only ones making money, right? The people shorting the market. But a lot of these longs who are just still bullish, they are losing a lot of money. The whales are accumulating profits by selling to those people with hope. But realistically, the price is just going down. Then what starts to happen is everyone starts to say the price is going to a certain level. It felt like for this one it was 20,000. Like, it seemed like everyone was like, it's going to 20K, and we didn't even really get close. But what starts to happen is that as we start to see the shorts getting too excited and leverage starts to pick up a lot, because everyone's like, oh, the market's going to fall. We got inflation, we got a war, we got all these things. It's gonna fall. It has no way to go but down, right? Then that's when we start to see a little bit of hope. That's when something usually happens like this. A little bit of hope. We've set the new higher high, and then they're kind of like, well, this is the dead cat bounce. But then next thing you know, we start to see these type of movements where the shorts are getting liquidated, the longs are getting liquidated over and over and over again. And the whales are playing you on both sides, right? They're playing you on both sides. It's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad. And it's trying to shake out as many people as they possibly can, because no one really knows what's going to happen. So as soon as people get overexcited one way, it just goes right back the other way. Then it gets excited one way, it goes back the other way. And it's kind of the game that they play. That's why I don't do shit in these moments. I'm like, you're not getting me, right? You can get other people, you're not getting me. And so what happens is that, typically speaking, this will either be enough in which we finally start to see the growth. They had their fun, right? That's what I call it. I call this if we break out, I look back and I say, oh, this is they had their fun phase. Something similar to this. Look at this up and down and up and down and up and oh shit, this is it. And then we're gone. Okay, the whales had their fun, right? And so if this is that moment that we're waiting for, it'll be readily identifiable by some of the things we saw, especially getting back above $43,300. But if we fall to the downside, I am under the belief that that is going to be the last capitulation before growth. I genuinely believe so. So what I'm expecting is that if we break to the day, and you know what? Let me explain why. Let me explain why. I don't really structure these live streams. I don't really plan them out before. I just talk. Let me explain why I think so. Every chart on the macro based perspective points to say that that is true. Let me talk about that. The weeklies. Let's talk about this. The weekly MACD, for example, did cross bullish here. Okay. Now, what we can see is that let's talk about all of the times the weekly MACD has crossed bullish. Although it does not mean it's guaranteed to go up, we just like to look at history to say what happens when it does. Last time it crossed bullish was back here. From there, we saw the excitement of August and a lot of that metaverse hype. Okay, that's kind of when Axie Infinity started to really to pump us. And although September did see a little bit of pullback, we did pretty good. Prior to that, we can see, let's kind of zoom in. We had a bit of a fake double cross. Boom, boom. But this is considered a bullish cross, which from there, we did shoot, to the sky. Prior to that, we saw the post, I don't say that word on YouTube. Don't want to get demonetized. The flu dump. Okay. Prior to that, bullish MACD cross was right around here. Growth from that point forward. Prior to that, let's talk about here. We were in a position to see growth, but then all of the bad, sick cases came out, and the whole entire world freaked out for like 2 weeks. Then we saw the dump, but I am still under the belief that we were in a position to see growth from that point forward. Looking back here, the time before that, when we saw a weekly MACD cross right here, growth. Okay. Now, what happens sometimes is that we'll get that bullish MACD cross and we don't go anywhere. And this is where it gets interesting. Okay. This is when it gets very, very interesting. Because what usually happens is that if we're in a situation where we get the bullish MACD cross, but we don't go anywhere, we're in one of those whale phases where they're having their fun. Shorts get liquidated, longs get liquidated. Shorts get liquidated, longs get liquidated. Neutrality, final capitulation growth. And I'm under the belief that if we are to see a drop to, like he said in the chat just now, maybe $36,000, that we would be in this position here. Go find a time where we saw a bullish MACD cross that didn't lead to growth within 3 months. I'll wait. So with that said, I am more bullish right now than I have been in a very long time. Okay. And I'm under the belief and under the thesis that even if we are in that final point where we're seeing this, maybe a little bit of neutrality and then the final capitulation, that this could be the moment that changes a lot of people's lives. That would be the moment that really could set some things off for really, really strong growth. Okay. Now, looking at the weekly RSI, let's get rid of this. Let's look at the weekly RSI. Does this support that? Okay, that thesis. Well, right now, one thing we can see is that whenever we look at this from a macro-based perspective, and I love looking at things from macro-based perspectives, looking at this macros, if it could go down like your live audience went up 7 to 100. Okay. Looking at the weekly RSI, what do we have here? Well, let's look at the most recent macro low. It was back in the summer of 2021. Well, where are we at now? Well, we're still sitting pretty high. I would say at this point, you can say this is a higher low. I would be pretty confident to say so. Now, if we do break to the downside here, we obviously could come down to set a lower low. But at this point, we have still set the higher low. And as we set this low to the higher low, you look real close. What do we have here? A lower low. Bullish divergence. We talked about bullish divergence and the importance of it on the charts. Because realistically, from a higher point on the RSI to the 70, we were capable of seeing this amount of growth. Imagine starting at a higher point with more room on the RSI to make it as simple as possible. Now, did we see extreme bearish divergence here? Yeah, we absolutely did. But whenever you see extreme bearish divergence to the top side with bullish divergence to the bottom side, you enter into a point of neutrality. And that point of neutrality, in my opinion, is an open door to see growth. Now, looking at historically, what happens when we get cases and drives of bullish divergence on the RSI? Let's see. Okay, let's see what happens. Let's look for some good examples. Okay, this is a good one right here. I like this one. Let's go ahead and let's look at this one from an exaggerated bullish divergence perspective. We put in equivalent lows. We'll put in the higher low. At the same time, we saw that bullish MACD cross Then we saw growth pretty much every week for a very long time. What happened when we saw, let's go back here, okay? Let's start to see when was the last macro lower low that we set. And these aren't really things that I look for super often, but let's just kind of play the game. Let's just kind of see what we can find here. This is a great one. Let's see. I like this one. I like this one here. We have a couple, but this is another drive of exaggerated bullish divergence, which seems to be pretty common, in which equal lows. This is pretty extreme, but lower lows or higher low. Sorry, exaggerated bullish divergence followed by a new all-time high. Now, this isn't common. It's not super common that you will see bullish divergence, and that's why there's not an extreme amount of them on the charts here. But the whole idea here is that when things start to point in the direction of bullishness on the macro based perspective, it is only a matter of time, usually. It's only a matter of time before we will eventually see growth. And considering the fact that we are in a position to see growth mixed in with other bullish factors, I am under the belief that we are either in the last moment, the last capitulation is on the way before the bounce, or we are about to go. Okay. Now, looking at the shorter time frames, what we can see is that at this given point, if we do go ahead and start to lose the bottom side of this wedge, we need to be aware. Let's get rid of this and let's get rid of this for now. We need to be aware of the breakdown targets of these ascending wedges. Generally, what happens whenever you lose the bottom side of an ascending wedge, what you're going to do is you're going to retrace back to the previous lows in which you set on that ascending wedge. Now, what that means is that usually speaking, you go and you can just draw lines. Where was the last time we touched the support? Right here, right here. Let's go ahead and get a line drawn there. You draw horizontal lines on them, and right here. And these are your support levels. These are the levels that say at any given point, you fall, expect a bounce. You fall, expect a bounce. You fall, expect a bounce. And these are the points that are the utmost most likely for us to bounce off of. But if we lose all of these, it is extremely likely that we will see a fall, possibly even back to as low as $30,000. We almost always put in an extremely lower macro low when we lose all support levels of an ascending wedge. Almost always. Almost always. Okay, let's see if I can find an example. I didn't look for an example first before this stream, but I'm sure we can find a decent one. Let's go. This is great. Look at this. Okay. So this doesn't necessarily count, but you guys get the you get the picture here. Okay. So what we can see is that we had something of, kind of just an ascending channel. I call these shotgun channels, and I don't know if I can say that on here, but it's fine. But what we can see, right? Whenever we start to fall, boom, we broke it. Where do we come straight down to? Key level of confluence right here. Boom. We came back down and we retested this previous level of support. But what happened when we lost that? We went up, we bounced, and where did we start to run into some support? Right at this key level. Now, mind you, we know what this month was. Okay, we know that this was all due to the news. What was going on in the world with the flu? But that even speaks further of it, that even with the news of what's going on in the world, we're still running into support at these previous levels of support on these ascending wedges. But look what happens when you lose them. Shit gets ugly. Okay. Now, again, this was due to news, but you get the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is that these levels are important. So, what that tells us is that even if we do break to the downside of this ascending wedge, we do still have three key levels of support that can hold us up. The first being at $37,800, the second being at $36,700, and the last being about $35,000. The loss of those three levels gets ugly. Arguments can be made that we revisit these previous lows. Okay. So, with that said, even if worst case scenario is we bounce to the bottom side, we have three key levels of support that very possibly could push us back to the upside. Okay. So even if we start to fall here, it's not the end of the world. We have set the higher high realistically from this bottom. We went up and we set the higher high. So even if we need to come all the way back down to set the higher low just above this, we're good. And that higher low will have to be established on one of these key levels of support. Okay. So all of those things saying that it's still pointed in a bullish direction, right? Although we are seeing bearishness today, and although we possibly could see bearishness with the break to the downside here, there is bullishness in thought that the liquidity at these key levels of support is going to be so extreme. The fact that the market is in a better place than it was back here, we very possibly could see growth. No one in this stream right now could convince me that the market is not in a less fragile place than before the inflation news came out, or right when the inflation news came out, and as Russia invaded Ukraine. That was about as fragile as this market could get. Any piece of bad news was tanking the market. So why would we at this point, realistically, from a fundamental based perspective, why would we crash significantly lower than we did when the market was at its most fragile? I don't buy it. I just don't buy it, right? I think these are well games, and I think the well games are probably coming to an end relatively soon. So that's my thesis on Bitcoin. Okay. That's my thesis on Bitcoin. $43,300 is my breakout target. That's where I need to see us get back above before I do get extremely bullish, toxically bullish. And if we do break to the downside, expect us to push towards $37,800 relatively soon, which will be the first level of support in which we will need to hold. And then from that point forward, I will update you guys on what I think will happen next. But we're about 36 minutes in. So now let's transfer this over. Now that I have presented you guys into what I think is going on with Bitcoin, let me talk about what's going on with alts, because although they do run in tandem with each other, there are differences, and there are differences you should acknowledge, right? You shouldn't just ignore what's going on with your alts. Okay. So we're at a point of neutrality today on Bitcoin dominance, and looky, this is beautiful. This just so perfectly works with what we just talked about. So I drew out, I don't know when I drew these out. I have no idea when I drew these out, but I'm happy I did. Look at this yellow line that I drew. I would go ahead and say that I probably drew this while we were breaking to the downside here. But we had this ascending wedge, ascending channel. And I was telling my Patreon members what usually happens. This is when I started the line. So I started it right up here. I said, what usually happens is we revisit these previous levels of support that we touched on this ascending wedge. I said, so if we come down to this one, expect us to fall then next to this previous level here and look for a bounce. And if that bounce fails, be on the lookout for us to break extremely lower to the downside, because these are the key levels of significance on ascending wedges. And look how this played out. We didn't quite touch this one on this bounce to the downside. I will say it was not 100% bulletproof, but we came straight down to the next one and looked at bounce. And now we're consolidating, about to figure out where this market's going to go. If Bitcoin breaks to the upside, it's going to do this. If Bitcoin breaks to the downside, it's going to do that. And we're going to W bottom out. And then this one's probably going to come back up to reach us like 43% or something. But it's so beautiful to see even these key support levels are of significance on Bitcoin dominance. It's not even a tradable cryptocurrency. It's just it's a ratio. But you can see the level of significance. So imagine that same level of significance on a tradable asset. These levels are important. These levels are important. So looking at Bitcoin dominance, we are in a position in which we can very clearly see the game that is being played right now. And so Bitcoin dominance isn't one that I really use for anything future based, right? I don't really look at Bitcoin dominance and say, oh, okay, like it's doing this, this, and this, so realistically it has to go down. No, not really. I don't like that. I can say realistically, if we lose this level, we're probably going to come down to this one. But trying to look at this and say, okay, this means the market's going to rally or this means the market's going to crash is a little bit too speculative for me. What I do is I use Bitcoin dominance for confirmations. So what I'm going to go ahead and say is that right now we are at a point of neutrality. And if we want a real strong confirmation on whether or not we're breaking to the upside or the downside, let's look to see what happens first. Do we come back up and establish a W bottom, which would be extremely bullish for Bitcoin dominance, which is realistically usually bearish for the rest of the market, meaning that more people are funneling money into Bitcoin, which they usually will only do if Bitcoin is just solo pumping, which it hasn't really been solo pumping, or if the market's falling and people are taking their money out of their alts into Bitcoin and they're putting it into Bitcoin, they're putting it into the safer asset. And then from that point forward, we see Bitcoin dominance going up, usually meaning, again, when Bitcoin dominance is climbing, the rest of the market's falling, okay? So do we come back up? Do we establish this W bottom now that we are leveling out back here and clear 42.2%? If we do so, it is more likely than not that I will stop buying anything. I will stop trading. If it's because Bitcoin is pumping and it takes Bitcoin dominance with it, that's not applicable. But if the market starts to fall, we lose that key level of support, and then we see this break to the upside here. That's a confirmation to me that my alts are probably going to get outperformed for a little while. And I don't really want to be buying right then and there. Okay. I would rather just wait this thing out. So right now, negative confirmation 42.2%. Now, in a situation in which we do see the price start to roll towards the downside, that's going to look like Bitcoin dominance breaking below 41.3%. Now, usually speaking, Bitcoin dominance will only break under 41.3% in a bull market. Or not even just 41.3%, but it will only break to the downside in a bull market. It is not often that the market falls and Bitcoin falls harder than the rest. It's not a very common occurrence. Okay. So in the event in which we do see Bitcoin dominance finally starting to, oops, I did not mean to do that, start to break to the downside. There we go. To break to the downside here, I would be willing, and I'd definitely be willing to say that we are in a position where alts are likely going to start to see progress. It would likely coincide with Bitcoin clearing 43.3K. And from there, I would be much more confident to be purchasing my alts. So what that tells me is right now I'm at a point of neutrality in which I need to just sit back and watch to see this back test to see if it holds or to see if it doesn't. Because as we are at a point of neutrality in the market in deciding, okay, are we going to hold or are we not going to hold? Bitcoin dominance and Bitcoin's performance in comparison to the alts is doing something very similar in which it's saying, are we going to break to the upside? Or are we going to break to the downside? And so, for all of those reasons, you can see that we're kind of coiling, we're consolidating, we're getting ready for something. And that's why I titled this Huge Move Soon. Because whichever way this shit goes, I think it's going to be quite dramatic. I think it's going to be quite dramatic. And it is very, very important that we are aware and ready for whatever move is on the way. Now, putting that into perspective with total market cap 2. What is total market cap 2? Well, total market cap 2 is the total market cap of all of your altcoins. You look at the entire world of crypto, you take out Bitcoin, that's your market cap. Take that market cap, that's total 2. Now, looking at total 2, one thing we can see is that it saw a pretty strong correction, right? It saw a pretty strong correction towards the downside here as necessary, I would say. I would say as necessary. Now, let's talk about why right now could be the moment that we do see some growth. Like, why could we see a bounce at this point? Well, generally speaking, what we know about Total 2, what we know about alts, what we know about just the crypto market in general is that a backtest key level of resistance and support. It's called an RS flip. RS flips typically, when successful, lead to new regional highs. That's just kind of what happens. And what we can do is we can look at where we are now, engage why where we are right now could very possibly coincide with the establishment of a higher low and a continuation towards the upside as Bitcoin tests a very important level. Whenever we look at confluence, what is confluence? Confluence, let's start with just the dictionary definition. Confluence. There we go. The junction, nah, not the junction of two rivers. Let's look at this. Let's look at a better example. An act or progress emerging, a major confluence of the world's financial markets. That's decent. I don't like these explanations. A coming or this is beautiful. A coming or flowing together, meeting or gathering at one point. And so generally, whenever we refer to confluence in crypto, what we mean is that there is one point of significance where these things keep coming together. These two different, three, four, five different moves always interact and have a very similar interaction with a similar point. Some people call this points of liquidity. Some people call this points of importance or significance. I just call it points of confluence. Now, what we can see is if we just zoom out, okay, let's just zoom out here. I drew a red line on where we bounced off of 2 days ago. And let's look at this area of confluence. We got a huge drop to the downside in May of 2021 that pretty much shocked the entire market. We rebounded all the way up to one point, right around $1.081 trillion, found some resistance, and that led us to set the new lower low. That was the strongest point of rejection we had seen on the price since the all-time high. Well, as we started to see the price working its way back up, we cleared this level, and immediately as we cleared it, you can see that momentum died for a quick second. We revisited a level. What was that level? This point of confluence, the red line. We started to continue upwards. We started doing amazing, but then September hit, and everyone was screaming September is historically a red month for Bitcoin, so it can't go up. And I think we kind of manifested this in a way. And then we saw this huge crash, this huge correction to the downside. Where did that correction come down to? Right to our point of confluence. Well, as we started to bounce and things started to do quite well, we started to see momentum dying off towards the end of September. And where did we find these two double bottoms? Our point of confluence. Well, okay, cool. What was this? RS. Previous point of resistance now flipped into a previous point of support, then confirms this as a point of confluence. Let's keep going forward. I don't think we're done. What can we see happening right now? Well, realistically, as we started to work our way up, as we started to see the price of cryptos doing a little bit better, where was the three touches that we put right here? Or two, let's just give it two. Boom. Where do we run into some resistance? After this huge correction to the downside, point of confluence. We worked our way all the way back up to it before seeing this eventual pullback to the downside to establish support. Well, why did we need to come back down right here to establish some support again? Why did we get rejected after these 2 days of green? Because we ran into this point of confluence. We needed more strength to break it. Well, as the price started to fall, where did the bulls start to step in order to try to stop this fall from happening so we could continue into a bull market, point of confluence? Now, I'm not going to bore you guys by continuing to do this over and over and over again, but just look at these levels of importance. We break out the first red day we see in 6 days straight of green. After we break the point of confluence, where did we find some support? The point of confluence. We continue upwards. Where did we bounce off of just now? Point of confluence. So what? And it's at 1.032 trillion. I said 1.081 because this line got mashed in. It's at 1.03. So all of those things tell me, historically, when we're above it, we're doing good. We're below it, we're not doing good. And that this is a level that has historically allowed us to see growth when we are capable of holding it. So, considering the fact that Bitcoin is in a position right now to possibly be getting ready to bounce towards the top side, as Total 2 hits one of its most extreme levels of significance, why would I not be under the belief that we have the potential to see growth just because of one day of red? But that's why I am under the belief that we are very possibly in a situation in which we could see growth extremely soon. Now, of course, we do have the thoughts and the talks and all of the understanding that we are at a macro Fibonacci between the 618 and the 786 that we came right back down to, which just so happens to run in tandem with our point of confluence. But I digress. But as you can see, this is important. This is a level of significance. And of all of this, says to me, we are very possibly in a position to see some growth. It just comes down to Bitcoin holding support and establishing the higher low on the shorter time frames, just like we talked about earlier. So what does that look like for some of our other alts? We're at 47 minutes. I got about another 20 to 30 in me right now because I'm feeling good and I feel like I'm on point. So let's go. What does that look like for Ethereum specifically? Well, Ethereum is doing something a little different. Okay. Ethereum is doing something a little bit different and it's kind of moving on its own in a way. What Ethereum did is that as we started to break out of this level of resistance, let's go ahead and get this pulled up here. Boom. What we could see, that's a beautiful triangle, but what we could see is that as we broke towards the top side here, we entered into what could be descending, or people could just consider a symmetrical triangle. I got you. Solana is up next. As we broke into this symmetrical triangle, as you guys can see, we did get a breakout to the top side. Well, what do we know about symmetrical triangles? More often than not, when we see a symmetrical triangle of this nature, it's almost never that we will do that. It is almost always that we will do this. Or even sometimes, annoyingly, a double fake out into an apex consolidation before the breakout here, right? But anywho, looking at this thing, it is very often that we come back to retest this previous level of resistance. It's just that's what we're doing right now. Okay. As you can see, we did get the breakout and we set the new higher high. And what we know is that it is extremely important that we set the higher high because what is a downtrend? Lower highs and lower lows. So if we need to get into an uptrend, realistically, it's as simple as ABC. We need to get a higher high. We need to get a higher low. And looking at this, considering the fact that on both of these perspectives, this previous high and this previous high here, we have set the higher high. It tells me that now we're in a position. Is it blurry? Okay. I'm not sure why. It's not giving me any update that we are lagging. Let me check. Let's see. Let me know if it's all good. I'll check. No, it's fine. It looks okay. Maybe a little. No lagging. My screen's good. Okay. Okay. I think maybe it just have been a little thing. But anyway, what we can see is that we are now back testing this key level of resistance. Now, looking at this key level of resistance, it is extremely important that we do what? We see our resistance flipped into support. And now, isn't it so interesting that as Bitcoin nears this so key level of support, and that its total two edges towards this key level of confluence that has interacted with for almost a year, that Ethereum is also interacting with a macro level of resistance and support as well. Isn't it just so interesting that these things just work so well in tandem with each other? And that if you're capable of picking out why these levels are important, then you really see the bigger picture that they all just flow together. And as you can see, that is the point of importance here for Ethereum. This descending level of resistance, previous resistance, looking to be flipped in as support. Now, what we knew is that realistically, whenever you start to see the price of a crypto interacting with the key level, what you need is three strong interactions. One and two. We got this little triple, just double touch right here, but I don't like that. I consider this to be one interaction. And the fact that we did get a bounce off of this level tells me that this has been confirmed as a level of relevance. Okay. And so for that reason, I would go ahead and say that as Bitcoin starts to grow, if Bitcoin gets up to a point in which it's capable of getting 41.6, 41.7 thousand, be on the lookout for Ethereum to break its own downward trend line. But if Bitcoin itself does come back down and lose this key level of support, this ascending level of support, it will very likely coincide with Ethereum breaking back into the bottom side of the symmetrical triangle, in which realistically, we only really have one more shot of bouncing back out before maybe correcting towards the downside and entering into a more long-term, pull towards the downside, which just none of us want to see at this point. Okay, possibly back towards $2,600. So that is why, as Bitcoin makes its move, it is important to monitor something like Ethereum, because this pull to the downside will be a lot more dramatic than Bitcoin's. I think we will see Bitcoin dominance go up in that example, which looks like Ethereum falling much worse than Bitcoin. Okay, so one could even say we need to do that, but you get the point. So looking at ETH, the biggest thing that I would go ahead and say is that if I was kind of basing my Bitcoin analysis on ETH and then my ETH analysis on Bitcoin, I would go ahead and say that the only time that I would be looking to buy ETH is if we get back above $3,300. Because why? Well, realistically, we do the same setup in which we did see for Bitcoin. We see the breakout of the trend line right here. We confirm a back testing of support right here. We clear the previous level of resistance. That's three strong confirmations. And on a third step confirmation, I am extremely confident that at that point we would be looking for some good growth. That also does put us in a position, I believe, to see a 618786 interaction. Yep, as you can see, this previous level of resistance is also our 618. So if we're capable of breaking into this zone, I am under the belief that we will be able to break above this zone. So that would just be a bet I'm willing to take. So personally, I wouldn't be buying until we get back above $3,300, and I would definitely start to worry a little, just for the short term, if we're capable of breaking below $2,954, because that then puts us back into the symmetrical triangle, and from that point, we have to re-clear this resistance and hope that the bulls step in on the bottom side here and this support level holds, because if not, we could definitely be seeing this 2,500 level interacted with this previous level of support back here. Okay, so that's Ethereum, and that's what I'm watching out for. Question: why does Ethereum follow Bitcoin? Seems like Ethereum and Bitcoin are almost opposites in a way. As the top two coins, they have different use cases. That's what I think. This is everyone questions, but it just kind of is the name of the game. Now, with the merge coming soon, it's a matter of time before ETH sees a lot of growth. I would say it's just a matter of time. If people told me screw the technical analysis, screw the fundamental analysis, screw the charts, don't care, ETH, it has upgrades, it's changing, it's bringing a lot of things to it that are going to be nothing but beneficial. It's going to become deflationary at some point. I'm just going to buy it every Tuesday for the rest of my life. I'll be like, okay, I don't blame you. Like, I think each one of those ones with this upgrade coming in, not soon, Rowdy, but eventually. Okay, dang it. ETH is going to upgrade. It's going to. And I think when it upgrades, one of these days, whenever that may be, I might be 35 years old, but it might happen. I think it's gonna be nothing but beneficial. And I think it will get to a point in which we do see Ethereum possibly test Bitcoin. Possibly test Bitcoin for king of cryptos. I think there will be a day where alts are, I think there will be a day that we start to see at least one or two altcoins very, very close to the market cap of Bitcoin, and I don't see a reason why Ethereum won't be one of them. I think the merge that will come eventually, of course, will definitely get to that point. Now, someone says, except for when the market sells the news. Yeah, of course. We know to take profits before that shit happens, right? Like realistically, when the hype and the excitement comes that it's happening, we're gonna be doing a lot of accumulating. And as soon as we get relatively close to that, maybe a couple weeks before, I'm gonna start getting out. Then, when we start to see the sell the news event, which is going to happen at some point, then we'll start to look to reaccumulate. But I have a whole game plan on buying on news and selling on news. Okay. Anyway, do you think Solana will overtake ETH long term? No. So yeah, so that's my game plan for Ethereum. Let's jump into Solana. Let's look at ETH Bitcoin. Maybe there's something interesting here. Not so much. I do like the fact that we are backtesting this previous level of resistance right here, which says that Ethereum definitely could be in a position to see growth in comparison to Bitcoin, which only happens in bull markets. So realistically, that does say that Ethereum could also be in a position to see growth pretty soon here, which further supports the idea that we could be able to, see some growth from the rest of the market pretty soon. So further backs up my point. KNC, please need support retrace levels in a short. Okay. We will check that out later. Later on. We have a little bit longer in the stream. Let's get rid of this. So I did post a Solana video yesterday, but we can talk about it. So what do we know about Solana? Well, Solana right now is seeing a bit of rejection, right? So we saw what could have been the breakout right here. It seemed as if we wanted to see the breakout, but we do have a pretty clear level of importance right here between $107 to $106 that we're struggling to get above. And so for that reason, of course, Solana is one of those ones we just have to be careful of. Now, you remember I told you guys that all of our cryptos are interacting with a very important level of, almost that importance, but just a pretty key and, significant level. Well, we can clearly see what it is for Solana. So Solana is one of those cryptos that interacts with its 618 to 786 macro Fibonacci levels more than almost any other crypto that I study. Okay. I study all of these charts. I just watch them, all of these. I just look at them all and just kind of see what they do. I'm intrigued by it. Solana has a tendency to interact with them much more significantly than any other crypto that I've seen. Okay. Let me give you guys some examples. So we saw Solana see the breakout right here of this downward sloping level. We kind of saw this whole month of September suck for the rest of the crypto market, but Solana did as well. And what we can see is that two things happen. First of all, we saw the breaking to the upside here, right? We saw this breaking to the upside here. Well, where did this level come up to? What was this, right? Why did we run into this and then bounce? Well, what we can do, easy, right? Clear as day, right? We came all the way up to our 618786 level, found some rejection, came back to the downside. Well, then you ask the question, well, why was this the bottom? Like, why was this the point that Solana said, okay, we're going to turn around, right? Really no strong levels of resistance here, right? I mean, we kind of had some confluence here, but nothing significant. So it's easy. Simple as day in hindsight, right? Hindsight's 2020. Right. Look here. Boom. Swing to the upside, came back down, retested the 618, wig down to it, use that to continue back towards the top side. And we can start to get annoying. I can get annoying and just keep giving you guys examples, but one more. I digress. On the shorter move, right after that, 618 bounce, 618 bounce. We came back up. Well, why did we run into resistance right here? There was really no confluence right here, right? Oh, no. Right into the 618786 zone, came back towards the downside, bounced off of it, used that for growth, went up, came back, back tested its previous high. Resistance to support flip allowed that to see growth. Okay. So you guys get the point. You guys get the point that this is an extremely important level. Okay. And that the 618 to 786 zone has always served as important for Solana. So now that we know that, and we put that into comparison, and again, the word juxtaposition is my favorite word to use overly. We can see that Solana's key level of importance, similar to how Ethereum is interacting with the symmetrical triangle, similar to how Bitcoin is interacting with the key level of support on this wedge, similar to how Total 2 itself is just at this key point of confluence. Solana is sitting at a macro Fibonacci that is the door or the barrier. It's either the barrier that's going to bounce us back towards the top side here and allow us to see, $150 plus maybe, or it's going to be the door that opens us back up to come retest $77. And considering the fact that that's that far away, considering the fact that that's 20+% away, it is extremely important that we make sure we are able to stay above this, right? So let's talk about it. What happens on either direction? With Solana, I'm doing the same formula. I'm following the same exact formula, okay? In which I say, If Solana is capable of breaking the downtrend, I won't be buying until it clears its macro regional high, which in this example is $115. I need to see it break it, hold it, get back above this previous level right here, and continue to the top side. Now, Solana also likes to inverse head and shoulders every now and then, so there is a chance we see something like this happen. But again, realistically, that all comes down to getting back above the neckline of this inverse head and shoulders, which is at $115. So considering the fact that we saw this previous level of support flipped into resistance right here, I will not be buying while we're under that point of rejection. I need us to get back above 115 before I'm comfortable. And so for that reason, still got quite a ways to go. But at this point, that is the point in which I would say Solana has a strong confirmation of likely working its way back up towards 140, 150. Okay. But I think at that point, we would start to look this at 160, 170. If Solana falls below $99, we've now entered into a critical moment. Okay. That is when we start to say, like, okay, this is it. Like, this is when Solana is going to make a decision. Like, are we bouncing or are we not? Because if we're not, it's going to get ugly. So we have this zone between 99 and 80 and 89 and $99, a $10 zone right here. That is our point of support. This is the last zone of support that Solana is going to have until it sees a fall to $77. Now, why is that so scary? The reason that's so scary for me, the thought of it falling below, that point, is because that then puts us in a position to come retest these previous lows. And I don't know about you guys, but historically speaking, when Solana loses macro lows, it's not good. Okay. It usually leads to pretty strong losses. An example of that, if we just clear these off for a second, is what we saw back here. Right. In which I pressed the wrong thing. Um, Here we go. In which we lost this macro low right here. And from that point forward, we fell another almost 40% before seeing any growth at all. Right. We even retested it. We saw this SR flip, which is very bearish. So considering the fact that this zone is the last thing that has us stopped from coming retest this bottom side around $77, I really want to see this zone hold, right? I really want to see this zone hold, and I want to see that we're capable of doing so. Do I know if it will? I have no idea, obviously. But the way in which we can identify bullishness is if we get back above 115. Bearishness really kicks in once we lose $99. Now, there is also psychological impacts, and I think people sleep on that a little bit. People don't talk about it enough, but whenever you do technical analysis, you have to consider psychological influence as well. In the sense is $100. So many people are willing to buy Solana at $100 because it's $100. It's like ADA at $1. When ADA goes down to $1 from like $2, people are like, "Oh, it's at $1. I'll buy it." So whenever we look at this as well, it also says that if we lose 100 and we go into double digits, some people might be like, "I'm getting out until it gets back above $100." So that it could also lead to some type of pullback that is not necessarily technically trackable, but more focused towards just the general thought processes of human beings. Okay, so there's also that. So that's why it's also important that we don't lose this level. Okay, and if we do, we just need to hold above 89. But if we lose 89, there is cause for concern. Okay. Is there any altcoin you think can make it up like ETH in 2 or 3 years time span? Hard to say. I would say BNB could. People are going to hate me for saying that, but I think so. I think BNB has a potential there. I'm not going to say ADA, but I think ADA. Okay. Simply for the fact that they just have a tendency just to kind of come out of nowhere and to see a lot of growth. So if Ethereum goes into kind of like this flat line for a little while and then ADA just so happens to make everything happen that it says it's gonna, it could. I think Ethereum's gonna be king for a long time though. Solana possibly. I think Solana has a lot of problems that could definitely hurt that, but we'll see. Dot and them parachains. I think Dot is still the dark knight. I think Dot's gonna take off at some point. But wouldn't Solana hold if Bitcoin starts rallying? Yep, it should. If Bitcoin starts to rally, I think Solana's going to rally. For sure. It all comes down to Bitcoin. We're just talking about why these levels that Solana and all of these other altcoins are at are important now, right? It all comes down to Bitcoin. None of this really matters that much. It's really just Bitcoin. But I'm telling you guys what key levels of significance are important and at what point I would start buying on the alts when Bitcoin makes its move. Let's look at. So looking at BNB, I don't really cover BNB too much on the channel, so I'm not sure if you guys want to see it or not. But looking at BNB specifically, I've always said that I wouldn't be buying BNB until it breaks this, just similarly to what we are seeing from Bitcoin. The biggest thing I can say about BNB at this point is that we are inverse head and shoulders at this point, and that if we're capable of breaking the trend line, I would be looking to accumulate. But that's really all I have to say on BNB. My trade right here is purchasing on this break here, stop loss set below whatever low is established. If this is the lowest low, I would set a stop loss below that just in case we come like this for some odd reason. And then what I would go ahead and do is set my breakout target range to about $650 to come retest the top side of this triangle. So I'd be looking to purchase around this area, stop loss around this area, breakout target, and where I would start to look to take profits would be around this area here. That's what I very possibly think could happen, but it really just comes into 33 Johnson, please. I said we're gonna get to it. Just let's relax. But yeah, so that's kind of the game plan. BNB does look like it's in a position to see some pretty strong growth, and I think it's just a matter of time. I did a little bit of accumulating on BNB towards some of these levels in a Patreon, but definitely think that that's real bullish to me. I mean, that's about as bull flag as it gets. So we'll see what happens. But I'm definitely bullish on BNB. I'm looking for it to clear. To put it into numerical value, I would go ahead and say like $465. Let's see. Yeah, agreed. So looking at Matic, you guys know we're gonna look at two more. We're gonna look at Matic, and then I'll let you guys pick from this list. But looking at Matic, so looking at Matic, it's a very similar formula. So looking at Matic again, I said that 4 times. I'm so sorry, but we can see here that there is a key level of confluence, right? We talked about confluence on Ethereum. We have that same similar level of confluence here from Matic, especially over the last 4 months or so, which is this zone between $1.35 to $1.25. As you can see, this has been the zone in which we have come down to and have not lost yet. So considering the fact that we have a very clear level of support towards the bottom side here, but we have a very clear level of double-sided rejection here, or double-sided resistance in which we had a 0.1, 0.2, a little bit of a fake out here back up to the trend line, but now a 0.3 at $1.72, we can very clearly see the range. So let me tell you guys the 2 ways I think are decent ways to play this. Now, mind you, not a financial advisor. Anything I say in this video is needed to be taken as financial advice. I'm simply just a guy in my room sitting behind a camera telling you guys options that I think do seem pretty viable on charts that represent cryptocurrency assets. But looking at this, the things that I think make sense. One trade that you could possibly do is start to look to accumulate around this area in which we are in here. Understanding a stop loss below $1.20 would be absolutely necessary. The reason being is that if we are to see, yeah, I agree. But at the end of the day, I like Matic. So it's kind of just like, just going to throw a dart at the dartboard and hope for the best. But what I would go ahead and say, the yellow line being my stop loss, is that if we're going to lose this level, likelihood is it's going to get a little bit ugly. Okay. Reason being is that we have 1 and we have 2 very recent levels of support establishment here, meaning that if we're capable of losing this, that's just not good, right? That means that the liquidity and that the bears are winning that battle, and that it very possibly could come back to even as low as $1. And obviously, we don't want to take part in that. So, looking at it, what I would go ahead and say is that if you're bullish, which I'm bullish, I'm just not going to take on this example. If you're bullish, one thing you can do is be on the lookout for us to revisit the top side of this range again. Now, one way in which you can do so is that you can always trade the range. Okay, like trading the range looks like this. A stop loss set. This is my stop loss right here. Okay. And as a crypto starts to do this, if you're really bullish and you're real confident, one thing you can do is, of course, trade the range and say, I'm going to purchase here. I'm going to be buying here, and I'm going to be willing to sell. I'm going to know that I lost the range battle. And this is kind of just a 50-50. This is a coin flip. But I lost the range battle if we break the bottom side of this support right here, right? If we lose this key level of support. And so for that reason, I'm going to set a stop loss below it. Okay, I'm going to give it a little bit of space just in case we fake out. But realistically, if we start to close too far below this, realistically, I lost and the trade was negative. But what you can also say is that, well, if you're right, there is the possibility we revisit back to the top side here. And so for that reason, this is when you start to look to take profits. It's the reason why I took a little bit of profits off a few of my trades as Bitcoin started to get back up towards this level. I said, until we clear this, I'm not confident. And until I'm confident, I'm going to continue to take profits. So for that reason, I took some profits like right around this area because I was like, what if we don't get up to it? Right. I thought something like this might happen. I was like, what if we don't get up to it? So I started to take profits on this strong day when we get overextended. And then you can see I won the range battle because we then started to fall back to the downside. So for Matic, what one could say is that in this, let's go ahead and just go back. There you go. What we can say is that we have a clear range between 172 and 124, and that if we were going to purchasing around this area isn't terrible. We have historically bounced off of this to revisit the top side of the range, as we did here. And so what we could go ahead and say is that we could set the stop loss around 118 and start looking to open up a range trade. Remember, a range trade is a 50-50. There's not really much knowing what's going to happen. And look to take profits around this area around 172. If it breaks 172, you can re-enter into the position, but just take profits here just in case it doesn't. Or you can just be happy with the gains you made. You did a good range trade and you went about your business. So that is an option. That's a viable option. If we look at something like didn't mean to do that. Let's look at the RSI and let's look at the MACD just to kind of see where they're looking. We may be able to support or kind of go against that. Well, one thing we can see on the MACD for Matic itself is that we are looking at see you, Rowdy. Looking at the daily MACD, one thing you can see is that we are entering into a point of possible bullish convergence, which looks like our blue line going up through your orange line. It's a bull cross, and more often than not, when we see that happen, we've seen growth. Right? We saw a pretty definitive bull cross right here, which led to a nice little pull to the top side of the range. We saw a nice bull cross back here, which led to a nice pull up to about $2. We saw a nice pull back here. Let's see, right about here, which led us to the all-time high. So for the most part, when we see these bull crosses, we are in a good position to see some growth. So that also tells me, I didn't mean to go that far back. Which also tells me that we are in a position possibly to see a push to the top side of that range, which usually means that we could see a bullish move from the from the Matic price, which looks like it's pushing up towards the top side of your range, meaning you could win that range trade. So that's always good. Looking at the RSI here, I'm not noticing. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not really noticing any strong drives of divergence, which does kind of confirm the point of neutrality in which we are in. Whenever we're in these ranges, sometimes you'll start to see that there isn't really anything too substantial. The only thing I am actually noticing is that we do have something of a drive of bearish divergence here, in which we have the higher or the higher high on the RSI, the lower high on the price. And generally speaking, that's not the best sign. But in the same breath, you can see here that we do actually have a low and a higher low with a low and a lower low. So we're seeing bears timestamp by chance. It was the very beginning. It was like the first 30 minutes, Elijah. But what you can see is that we are seeing divergence on both sides. It's called double-sided divergence. It's just a point of neutrality. So for that reason, that means that yeah, it definitely could pump to the upside. It could pump to the downside. It could go up, could go down, like people like to say. So definitely means to me that a range trade wouldn't be a terrible idea here, but do understand it's a coin flip, and I would not do it without a stop loss. Okay. Or what you can do is what I'm going to do is I'm very happy with the gains I've seen on Matic. I've I traded throughout this whole thing. I bought some, not the bottom. I didn't time the bottom perfectly, but I did buy some here, and I remember buying on this back test. And I actually took Matic every single time we got overextended. So I took profits all the way up throughout this thing. Made quite some good trades on this move to the upside last year. So at this point, I'm taking my time on Matic. I feel like I don't want to say the wells run dry, but it definitely needs a refill. And so for that reason, I'm just gonna wait for Matic to clear 172. I'm gonna say I'm not gonna buy Matic until it breaks the top side here, clears this level of resistance and holds above it. And if it's capable of doing so, I will accumulate. Till then, I'm just gonna let it run. I'm just gonna let it do what it wants to do. Okay. Let's see. Let's talk about Ada Cardano because I think, yep, that was one that we saw doing well. So Ada Cardano is one that is in a very similar situation to Solana. Remember what we said about Solana. It needs to hold that macro level of Fibonacci support. Ada is in a similar position here, in which we are back testing this previous level of resistance, looking to flip this R into S, this resistance into support, and if capable of doing so. If we see it, let's go 4 hours. We're gonna be able to see this a little bit clearer. If we see ADA capable of working its way back above like 100 or $1.07. Yeah, I would say, yeah, probably, we could see a good buy on ADA Cardano. I know a lot of people like to make fun of it, but it is what it is. It definitely could be in a position to see some great growth here. And looking at ADA, I would go ahead and say that I would not buy it until it gets back above $1.06, personally speaking. Okay. Just because there's just too much risk. There is just too much risk. I do like the fact that we are at this key level of support. So right now, it is as simple as ABC saying that if we are above 87 cents, we are looking okay to see a bounce. We do have this macro Fibonacci zone, in which very possibly could hold. We just need to see it hold, and we need to see the bounce back above 106. Until we get above 106, I wouldn't be flipping bullish on ADA just yet. Okay, looking at that, pairing that with the RSI and of course the MACD, which are my two favorite indicators, what we can see, we are again just similar to Solana and Matic. We are seeing some type of bullish convergence here on the daily MACD, which is always important. And in that same light, we can see here. Let's pair this. We are not seeing any super strong drives of divergence on either direction. Looking at the 4 hour charts, I feel like I did pick up a drive of divergence earlier. Yep, in which we can see here that we did set the higher low very barely, but we did set the lower low. That's a strong drive of divergence that did kind of say we were very possibly going to see a bounce. We got the bounce, but now it just comes down to what do we do on the longer time frames here. So for the most part, we can even look at the Bollinger Bands and say that we are extended to the downside, and it does seem more likely that we will get a stronger bounce here back up to this 20 simple moving average or even around $1.06. But it comes back down to, at this point, do we hold above 87 to 94 cents, use that key zone of support to get back above 106? And if we're capable of doing so, I would get more bullish. But until that happens, very conservative right here. Okay, looking at ADA Cardano. Okay. Those are the main ones that I did want to cover. Um, okay. Oh man, we're at an hour and 15. I have not done a stream this long in a long time. Let's get some water up. I will say, probably got like 10 minutes. So one thing that's kind of like a funny joke, but not necessarily, it's just kind of weird. But my jaw hurts pretty bad. In my fight, I really didn't take super bad damage. But with your mouthpiece, I bit down on it so hard for so long that my jaw is like jacked. So yeah. Bitcoin Cash, I don't know much about Bitcoin Cash in the sense that I don't really follow it enough, and so that would be quite difficult for me to answer from an educated perspective, to be honest. Um, so I would just need to kind of look into it a little bit more. This is why you wanted me to look at KNC. What is this thing? What is KNC? Oops. What is this thing? Kyber Network Crystal. How big is it? Is it fully diluted? 830 million. Oh, this is pretty big. What is this? Oh god. Okay, let's see. I mean, it looks great. I mean, I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. Definitely looks great. Let's see. I know you were looking for a short trade, and I definitely understand why. Looking at this thing, it does seem a bit extended to the top side, but at the end of the day, it has been kind of just chugging along. So it's really not. It's really not giving any signs yet. The biggest thing I would say is it's starting to mirror previous moves when it usually slows down. Looking at the MACD here, it is at a pretty significant or similar level to what we are seeing usually. Let me look at the RSI here. Now, mind you, all of this is speculation because I do not know anything about this. But what we can see is that it's not really running on divergence that much. I mean, realistically, it's about wow. I mean, this is pretty healthy. Whenever I say healthy, the biggest things that I focus on are a couple things. Look, so we have a high, we have a high, we have a high. That looks like a big ass cup and handle pattern, but I'm not even gonna say what that breakout target would be. But looking at this thing, we can see that we did put in equivalent highs, equivalent highs, equivalent highs. We're at an equivalent high here. So this is usually the point in which it rolls. It would be interesting to see if it breaks it. It would be interesting to see if it starts to kind of work its way and continue towards the top side. What I would say, personally speaking, about this one is that although It does look healthy. I honestly do believe that it is seemingly in a position in which it should slow down soon. I don't know if there's any news fueling it. I don't know if there's any reason why it's doing this, but historically speaking, looking at KNC, what you can see is that the time it spends before it sees a correction of this nature or of this nature, of this nature, and when it's extended into the Bollinger Bands, it's not very long. It doesn't usually stay here very long. And so, considering the fact that it's at that same level on the RSI and the fact that it is overextended into its weekly Bollinger Bands, I would almost say that it seems as if it's one that I would very slowly get into. Like, I wouldn't accumulate on this right now, but if you wanted to, like if you absolutely must, I would for sure do it very slowly and wait for a retest back to the 20-week simple moving average. It almost always seems to come back down to that level. Maybe not necessarily here, but it seems like it comes within about a couple percentage points within that level there. So I would almost be willing to say like 240 or something like that right now seems to be the point in which if it rolls, definitely could come back to around its previous levels of resistance and this 20 simple moving average. It is one that I'll just have to look into. I don't really know, but I would go ahead and say that a full blown breakdown to the downside, I would be looking for like 240 at minimum. But expect at some point it's going to slow down and it's going to revisit this 20 simple moving average. It almost always does from what we can see. Um, like that, like this, similar here. Respected it as resistance on the top side. So for KNC, I would definitely say be absolutely cautious on this thing as it's working its way towards the top side. If you must accumulate, accumulate in small doses and be looking for the larger accumulation once we get an interaction somewhere around that 20 simple moving average. Maybe if it gets within 4 to 5% of it, that could be a time of accumulation there. Expecting that it does continue this move that it's on. It looks great and it's definitely moving healthily, but buying in that is risky. Now, I actually want to see, looking at these lows here, that higher low, I'd almost be willing to bet we saw bears bullish divergence on it. That we did. In which you can see, we put in the low. Let's get rid of this. Low, higher low, low. I can't tell. Let's see. I guess in perspective of this one, we did put in the higher low, but that was very close to bullish divergence. So that's always a good sign as well. So yeah, I would say that it seems as if it is going to probably continue a little bit, but I would be very careful because I think that a pullback is more likely than not relatively soon. Okay, especially on a 21% day. Like that's usually signs like okay, we're getting to the top. Looking at the 4 hours, yeah, yeah, it would shock me if this doesn't pull back relatively soon. Okay. KDA, please. I feel like I have KDA. Okay. That's pretty clear. I just gotta drag that. Hold on. I'm gonna look to see what this thing's doing. I haven't looked at this in a long time. So this actually looks pretty common. From what I'm seeing. So the biggest thing that I would say about is this Cadena? Yeah, okay. The biggest thing I would say about Cadena right now is that it is still pretty new and it is still, although it's been around for what, like a year or so, it is still trying to figure out its own style in terms of structure. And so the biggest thing that I would say at this given point is that playing this thing very slowly would be the best thing to do as well. I do like the fact that we saw the break of the trend and the back testing of the trend at this point. But what I would go ahead and say is that right now, realistically, it is in a point in which it is just kind of consolidating. And that is always a risk, right? We did put in the lower lows here off the breakout. We came back to put in the lower lows. So it's not even in an uptrend just yet. And so for that reason, as it does continue to backtest this thing, I would not even be purchasing this thing realistically until we're at least capable of breaking this zone here. I would say like 780, and I know that's a lot, right? I mean that's 30% from where we're at now, but realistically, considering the fact that it's been consolidating, it doesn't really seem as if it's coming out of this consolidation right now. There's a zone confluence here. No, I don't really know much about Cadena, so I can't really speak from a fundamental perspective. But realistically, off of this range right now, we've not really set any higher highs. It's just been constantly lower high, lower high, lower high, with really no higher lows, maybe one possibly being established here. So it just almost feels as if it's just not ready to move yet. And so for that reason, I would be looking for it to finally set a macro higher high above 780 before I get too confident in it here. I do like the fact that it is nearly fully reset and it has consolidated here on the RSI, especially seeing that the MACD does seem to be wanting to push back in a bullish direction. But at this point, I definitely wouldn't say that this seems the most bullish to me right now. It does seem like it's entered into another phase, right? It was in the downtrend, accumulation, the well games, and then growth. But until we see that growth, I definitely would kind of be a little bit cautious with Cadena. Um, all right, we'll do one more. Ugh. We'll do one more, and we're gonna kind of let the chat choose in a way. So whatever we see the most of major cryptos, that's the one we're gonna do. Okay. So go ahead and throw them in there. I'm gonna just let you guys do that, and then I'm gonna kind of see what else going on. Okay. Inge, Vulcan Forge. I love Vulcan Forge. Um, I saw Inge earlier as well. Kava, John Stamos, Sand. Not really seeing any confluence in this chat here. Chat. All right, let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. All right, might just have to pick one. Solana. I went over Solana already. Vulcan Forge is so goaded. Let's do. Okay, let's do Sand. I like Sand. I forgot. Sand's one that I actually will be doing a buy on pretty soon. So looking at Sand, the reason we're also going to do Sand is I think Sand controls a lot of the other ones. Like I think when Sand moves, Engine and Vulcan Forge and UFO, like all of those do too. So we're going to talk about Sand. That one kind of controls a lot of the metaverse games or metaverse cryptos. So looking at Sand's actually had a big moment too. Okay, so Sand's had a big moment too. I'm glad we talked about this one. So I'm sure you guys can see that red line is very faint because we need to start to think about it pretty soon. But looking at Sand, we can see that we are at a point right now where we are trying our absolute hardest to hold this level of confluence on the word of the day at $2.60. Right, one, two, nearly three, four interactions here of significance, and that kind of does show that as we bounce off of it, we've had moments where we've seen pretty strong growth. But what that tells us is that if this level does fail, if we start to see something like Bitcoin breaking its own support and crashing to the downside, do expect to see Sand breaking as low as the bottom side of this channel, which is at $1.88 right now. Okay. What's interesting about Sand is that we're entering into the apex of this key level of support and this level of resistance right here. And as we do break one side or the other, I think it's going to be quite significant. And I think Sand's going to move a lot. Okay. To the upside, we have the door open up to 300%. Definitely possible. Okay. We saw a lot of growth. Now we're in the consolidation. And this is what it does: growth, consolidate, growth, consolidate. Be great if we saw some more growth, but it comes down to, do we break the trend here? And are we capable of holding outside of it? I got faked out back here when we saw this little fake trend break. So do we break it? Do we put in what could be considered a W bottom? If that is the case, and if we do hold right here, we bounce to the top side, I'm on the lookout for it to clear 353. If we clear 353 right here, I do believe that at that point, we are confirming the possibility of this W bottom with a breakout target sitting somewhere. I would go ahead and say that we very possibly could see 480 to $5, which could be a nice little buy, right? I mean, that could be a gain of 40% or so. So for that reason, I would be looking to buy Sand not when it breaks the trend, but when it breaks again the macro regional high, which is around $3, and let's give it about 65. Let's say 65. I think 365 clears all of these hourly closes, daily closes. That would be the move of the day there. So looking for Sand to get back above 366. First step is, of course, breaking the trend line. That also does put it in a position where it breaks its 20-day simple moving average, as well as its 50, as well as its 200. So that would put it in a position to break all of its important moving average. And from there, it is very likely it does see growth to the top side here. Putting that into perspective with the good old RSI, I should probably just leave these up. I did. Okay. What we can see here is that we do have the MACD looking to print these pink bars, which usually is a sign that we are going to see a bullish cross relatively soon, even if we do continue into a bit of a downtrend a little bit longer. More often than not, once we start to print these pink bars, we do usually go into bullishness relatively soon thereafter. And putting that into perspective as well with our RSI, you can see that we are doing a decent job. We've set the equivalent low, we've set the higher low. So we are still seeing some type of exaggerated bullish divergence here, maybe even exaggerated hidden bullish divergence here. But you can see there are divergences in the sense that we are seeing momentum swinging in the direction of the bulls as the bears do fail to push this RSI lower and lower, which could put us in a position to see some growth relatively soon. Okay. So it comes down to us getting above 364, but do understand that if we lose this for the first time since we got above it realistically, that does put us in a position to see losses down towards even $1.80 something, which looks like a possible loss of over 30% as we do possibly come back in to confirm this level of support here. We don't want to see this turn into a descending wedge. We want to maintain this triangular shape. Okay. So with that said, guys, that is going to be about it for that, guys. We're about an hour and a half in. I don't want to make this too long so people rewatching it can rewatch it and not, have to spend an hour and a half listening to me. But with that said, guys, I am back. I'm better than ever. Again, we talked about it at the beginning of the stream. This fight is over. We went out there, we won it, we got the job done, which was great. And now that we are back, I am extremely happy to just finally be able to just get back in the groove of things, start really being able to put my focus back into YouTube, putting my focus into technical analysis and crypto, and really growing the channel. And I hope you guys are excited that we are back. I'm going to try to do these live streams once or twice a week on the public channel. Do understand I do pretty much all of my live streaming over in the Patreon. That's pretty much when I do just about all of it. I'm actually going to show you guys a little bit of a sneak peek here of what all I got going on. But this is one of the channels. This is where I post like all of my technical analysis and stuff in the Patreon. Now, there was a little bit of an off time because I fought this weekend, but you guys can see I did a live stream on the 13th. I did a live stream on the 12th. I did a live stream on the 11th. I've been doing live streams as often as I possibly can. These are hours. That's like 30 minutes. So this was a 30-minute stream that we did on the Patreon. This was a 24-minute stream we did on the Patreon, 34-minute stream on the Patreon, whole bunch of technical analysis. So I've been kind of, hustling, right? I've been trying to get back in the groove of things, especially now that I'm done. So overall, that is where I do the majority of it. The link is in the description below. So if you do want to check it out, you can check it out. But at the end of the day, I will be posting as much free content as I possibly can for those of you who are not able to, and I am totally okay with that. Okay, so 5K, 5,000 crow coins or 1K sand coins. I'd go with sand. But with that said, that's going to be about it for the stream. I hope you guys did enjoy. Will Smith that like button if you could, of course, and I will see you all next time.